I like to say that there are two addictions that I have for which there's no cure. I'm addicted to Minako, and I'm addicted to music, and then I have my daughter, you know, so I'm screwed. I realized that it isn't me playing my ideas, getting them across with what she's doing, and it isn't me accompanying what she's doing. It's realizing that she is God, and my job is to worship her.
I start out always, every day, okay, today I'm going to succeed, but it's not that easy.
But we're, you know, it's only been 43 years. It takes time. Oh, and I make her laugh. That's the thing. Every time I make her laugh, I feel like I've hit a home run. So that's, as long as I know that I'm making her laugh, then I feel like we have a good relationship. Only had one chance in life. One door that was open in which I could have the same kind of articulation that any artist would hope for. And at the same time, I could escape, get away from what I thought was a kind of hell. I loved the fact that music just opened a door to another place. And when you start doing it, when you start playing music, if you look at a clock and you begin subdividing, ta, 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 then 2, ta, 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 and 3, ta, 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 then 4. When you subdivide time to that degree, and by the way, that's an elementary degree, time ceases to exist, so you actually erase time through time. I'm teaching a Jewish student, and I was showing him a videotape of me and George Hooks. In the context of time, I knew two things. I was there to create this time that they would remember for the rest of their life as an eternal moment. It was transformed musically. To say that gives me joy, it also gave me an escape. My parents became something to get away from. I think music was probably going on in my head, but it wasn't until I was 14 that this subdivision of time got clicked on and never clicked off.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, here's one you all can sing with us. When the Saints Go Marching In.
My mother, who unfortunately, I have very little good to say, did some things. And one of them is, she took me to see Louis Armstrong. We hadn't moved to Nevada yet, so I had to be 6. And I just got up and went backstage because the way he performed, he made you feel like he was talking to you directly. And at that age, it's pretty easy to get past security. So I ended up in his dressing room. And my mom, maybe she knew me well enough to know that I wasn't kidnapped. And she found me. And when she found me, I was sitting on his lap and talking, and he was just like, you know, I don't even remember what he said. I just remembered that I was just glowing in this really great feeling of how happy he made me feel, how happy the music made me feel, I should say. I didn't have a vision of myself, but I had a really clear view of everyone else. When you watch a butterfly, and it's going like this, right? And it's like, oh, maybe I'll land here, and then it changes its mind and goes somewhere else instead. That's how I've lived my whole life. I gravitated towards something, and it either drew me in, or I changed my mind, but I don't think I thought about it much more than a butterfly. Started with piano lessons when I was 3, and that went on almost every week until I was 6 or 7. When I was at the Conservatory of San Francisco, there was a man named Saul Joseph who was a Holocaust survivor, and he taught counterpoint. And I was in his room by myself, and I was practicing this. He walked in and he said, let me show you something. He was one of these guys who could talk while he was playing. You know, he's saying, you know, starting off here in C major, very simple, almost simplistic, you know. And now we've moved to the 2 chord, right? So we have a 1 chord and a 2 chord, right? He talked all the way through, and he got to the very end of the piece and he said, how could you even look at this piece and not believe in God? And this is a guy who got out of Germany the hard way, you know. They gave a test in the band room, and they would play a metronome, like they'd go like that. And then they would stop the sound, and you had to keep counting. And after some time, maybe as many as 19 beats, they would say, where are we? And I nailed it. So they said, we need clarinet players and they need drummers in the band. Thank God they needed drummers, because usually nobody needs drummers. Everybody wants to play the drums. And I went home and I told my stepfather, Joe Hinton, and he said, forget about the clarinet, got to play drums. Drums are where it's at. I was given a pair of sticks and told to play certain things, you know, like where you would buzz, like that kind. In the school band, you know, maybe march a little bit, you know. And I went back to California, and we rented an apartment on Divisadero Street. It's important because Divisadero Street was like the heart of Harlem for San Francisco. My grandmother had an apartment up on 27th and Lake in San Francisco, which is a much nicer area. So I enrolled in the junior high school there, which meant that I had to come home to this other place that was there was like just nothing but pigeons outside the window. I started playing, and there was programs on at the time, like everything from Hootenanny, the New Christy Minstrels, the Dave Clark, all on TV, probably all black and white. I don't even remember a source of anything like a radio or anything that I could turn up loud. I was so good at playing soft back then. It didn't occur to me that I might be drowning everything out. So I just started playing. I'd go to the band room at the junior high school. I told the guys at the school that I could play the drums because they were forming a band. And then at the same time, I went home and I drove my stepfather crazy until he took me to the music store and bought me a gold sparkle Ludwig drum set. And I played all the time. It's like all I did. It's the only thing I remember doing. I liked the lunches. You could buy like 2 hot dogs for nothing. And I would take it by myself. I was very lonely, I think, at the time. And I would take it into the auditorium and just sit by myself in the auditorium. I was reading Crime and Punishment. I loved my life at the time. We formed a band that they were having a talent show at the school. We were going to play 2 songs by the Ventures. We were going to play Wipeout. Back then, I don't know what I was doing. I was probably playing with a lot of tension, you know, like you know, as opposed to, you know, instead of like that kind of technique, right? They put me on the stage and they put the kid on the piano and the guitar player down off the stage. We started playing, the curtain went up, and I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't see anything. There was that train light, the same one I saw at Metropolitan Opera House. There was a train light in my face, could not hear, they did not even exist. And I'm trying to guess when the song went from, you know, da 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 ya da 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 dee da. Then I'm thinking, oh, it's going to change here, you know. And I went to what I thought the beat was for that, and it was a complete disaster. I should have quit then. My stepfather had a variety of jobs, and sometimes it was selling used cars, sometimes it was working. He was selling ads at the San Francisco Chronicle. We were able to move to Daly City, right outside of San Francisco, to a little house on Gilmore. And when I was there, we had a person, just him and his father would come and mow the lawn. His name was Johnny Scavo. And Johnny came to me with this ad that said, for sale, for reasonable amount of money, at Hart Music Center in San Carlos, California, which was owned by Leonard Hart, and now his son had joined him after getting out of the Air Force. And every time he came to mow the lawn, I was playing the drums. So he asked me if I would go and look at the drums that were for sale at Hart Music Center in San Carlos, about 19 miles away from where I lived. So I got in his car. He had a big pink Cadillac, and we drove down and went to the store. I looked at the drums, and I remember doing one of these kinds of rolls. I was going like, you know, oh yeah, it's a pretty good drum, you know, it's a really nice set, you know. And Mickey Hart comes out of this room, and he went over to the drum, and he went like, you know, and he goes, yeah, it's a pretty good drums, you know, pretty good drum set. And I just was like, do you give lessons? And he said, call me after the first of the year. And so I had to wait. And I called the first, nobody answered. The second, nobody answered. The third, they answered the phone. I set up my first lesson. I went there and I told Mickey right then and there that I want to be a great drummer, and if I'm not a great drummer in 10 years, I'm going to come back and punch him in the nose.
But there's a lot more to it than that.
All of a sudden, I saw what an eagle could do, like as a chicken, you know, and I was like, I want to be able to do that. So I wanted that, and also my stepfather did tell me and play records of Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich and stuff. So I would hear, you know, Buddy could play that kind of, you know, he could play like that. And all of a sudden there was this guy playing that way. That moment was definitely a life-changing moment for me. He knew that I was serious when I said, do you teach? I want to study with you. And then when I went to take the lesson, I told him, I'll do whatever you say. And I told him I was going to punch him in the nose. Now, at the time, I didn't know that he had won the European Judo Championship of all the armed forces. But because I said that, and he was who he was, I think he probably liked it. So he told me then, right at that moment, you're going to practice 4 hours a day minimum. If you practice 4 hours a day, you can have 1 hour by yourself to do whatever you want, to just jam and have fun. My stepfather took me to a place in the very heart of the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco. There was a club there that had jam sessions from 12 noon to 12 midnight on the weekends. The leader of the band was Norman Williams. He was kind of a local hero. He knew Charlie Parker, you know, same way I knew Buddy Rich or something. You know, he didn't talk much, but he could play the heck out of the alto sax. And my stepfather brought me there. It was a jam session because it went for 12 hours. And he said, can my son sit in? And my son could play anything. So he was like, yeah, come up after the song or something, you know. And I got up, and they did something what's called trying to nail you to the wall. Now, I guess my father was already playing all the Tommy Dorsey records, all the Benny Goodman records, all the Gene Krupa records. I don't think he was into bebop at the time, you know. But we sat down, and nailing somebody to the wall means you invite them to play in the band, and then you play something so hard that they leave with their tail. So they played like Cherokee, and it was like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So I played like I was like really played. I was like on fire. And he called me within 24 hours and gave me the job. He had other jobs. He would go over to Jimbo's Bop City. He would bring me with him on Thursday nights. We would play from like 9 to 2. On the weekends, we'd actually go from 2 o'clock, and then we'd go to it was an after hours club that went to 6 in the morning. And the owner, he said, you come in here at 2 in the morning, and I don't want you to leave until 6. And so I was like, no problem. On Sunday morning, maybe even sometimes Saturday morning, at 6 in the morning, you'd go across the street to Jack's of Sutter Street, and they had an organ trio there with Merle Saunders on the B3. I still love that sound. And he would play, and there was Rudy Johnson was on saxophone, and they had this big, huge drummer named Eddie, I forget his last name. He had a Harley Davidson motorcycle seat on springs. Boom, 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 boom. You didn't have to do anything. And they treated me like one of the band, and oh man, you know, it was just like, I could have just got lost there forever. But it wasn't my gig. I was just sitting in and being treated like, you know, like a really lucky kid, you know. Then I guess my high school had things going on. I went to Westmore High School in Daly City, California. It had enrollment of about 2,000, so it was a pretty big school. And the music program included a big band, a jazz big band. We went up to Nevada, to the University of Nevada, for a 5 Western States competition of jazz big bands. And I happened to be featured in the band that year, and it was the same year that Louis Bellson was invited as the guest star of honor. Louis Bellson was the drummer for Duke Ellington. He was married to Pearl Bailey. Louis was just the sweetest person on earth. And he watched me play the solo that year. Not only did our band win the Best Band Award, but I won the Outstanding Musician Award of the entire festival. And I had a big solo, you know, like one of those things where the band like just sits there forever. And Louis was standing there listening, and at the end of it, we were friends, you know. He had to go out and do his clinic and talk to the crowd and be the star. He's so nice, right? He said, like, so what kind of sticks are you using, right? Things like that. And I was using Regal Tip 5A. He had Louis Bellson model drumstick, right? So he goes, do you mind if I use them for my presentation, you know? And I was like, yeah, you know. He went out there with my one pair of sticks, and he did his whole demonstration. It began a series of things where he would come to town to play in San Francisco. I was given carte blanche. I was hanging out in the dressing room the first time he came. He was with Tony Bennett at Mr. D's. I'd just hang out with him and the other guests. He had a clinic. He took me to the clinic with him, and I got up on stage with him, and we played together, and that was like great. Louis did something that I witnessed that was so remarkable. Buddy Rich was coming to town to play across the street at Basin Street West. He knew that I knew Buddy. I guess, you know, I can keep a lid on that. And he said, so Buddy's coming to town. I was going, yeah. He goes, are we going to lose you over to his camp when he gets here? And I swore allegiance to Louis Bellson that moment. It's a complete lie. It's okay, because they were really good friends. We all went out together, actually, at one point. But Louis was playing a solo in the middle of the solo, and it was a solo where he was like playing really powerful and really beautiful and just loving, like a loving sound, you know. And then right in the middle, he'd have this thing where he'd be playing really strong, you know, and he'd get really soft. And right in the middle of the softest moment, some jerk in the back of the audience, a heckler, yelled, "He ain't no Buddy Rich." So I watched this man who was famous for being the sweetest, gentlest person on the drums you've ever imagined get turned like red, and then like smoke was coming out of his ears, and he started getting louder and louder and stronger, and then he played this incredible solo. And if you go on YouTube and you look up Louis Bellson and you look at some of his solos, these are magnificent architectural masterpieces. He was even a composer. So he finished the solo, right? And he puts down the drumsticks and he walks over to the microphone and he says, "And Buddy Rich ain't no Louis Bellson." He agreed to come to my house. My father had a momentary great gig that put us in a pretty nice house with a swimming pool. So Louis Bellson came to my house for a luncheon. And they came in, they very graciously chatted with my parents for a few minutes. And then we went in my room, which had a glass door that opened up to a swimming pool in this house. It's a pretty cool room. I borrowed the screen sparkle from my high school, and I brought it, and I'd set up a set like he plays, you know. We just had the best time. The following year, he was in town, and he had to take a day off and fly to Los Angeles early because Pearl Bailey's mother had died and he had to go to the funeral. He called Colin Bailey to sub for him, and he asked if I would help to make sure that he got up at 6 o'clock in the morning to make the plane. So I sat in the living room, and at 6 a.m. I knocked on his door and made sure that he was awake, and we went to the airport together. I remember being surprised that he wasn't recognized by everybody at the airport. I went to Basin Street West to see him with the Buddy Rich Band, and I sat in the audience, and afterwards I came up with my certificate from the National Association of Rudimental Drummers, and I went up to him as he was coming off the bandstand, gave him a pen and asked for his autograph, and I said, "Can I ask you a question?" He said, "Yeah. I'm thinking about giving up the drum set for 8 months to just concentrate on my snare drumming. Is that going to hurt me when I come back?" I remember he went like, "Nah," like that, right? And gave me his autograph. At least 8 months went by, maybe the year went by, and he came back to town and then played at a place called Bimbo's 365 Club. I went there, sat in the audience. Well, he finished performing, and a team of wild horses couldn't keep me from trying to go backstage. So I went backstage, and I stood in this dark hallway, and this waiter comes by with a tray of drinks for all of his guests. And he looks at me and he says, "Are you here to see Buddy Rich?" And I said, "Yes." And so he goes to the dressing room. I didn't know if there would be a response. And he comes back out and he says, "Come on in." So I go in, and now I'm standing there, and he offers me a drink. And I said, "No, thank you." And then I said, "I don't know if you remember, but I met you last year, and I asked you about preparing for this competition." I didn't know what else to say next. And as everybody was leaving the dressing room, I said, "I have a really audacious question." Talking to him was a little bit like talking to Al Capone. You didn't want to rub him the wrong way. So I said, "If I promise that you never know that I'm here and nobody sees me, can I hide backstage while you perform?" And he said, "Yes." And I would get right behind that curtain, and I would watch when his heel came down on the pedal, when his index finger was on his left hand, posture, everything that he did, I would watch closely. I had his recordings at home, and I played them over and over and over and over again. And this went on for like 4, 5, 6 days like that. And then on one of the days, I guess I was leaving, going towards the stage door, and he was coming out maybe a second or two later, and he kind of embraced me, like he was like you do after a great performance, right? And I went out, I was still driving my dad's demonstrators at the time. And then this one night, he walks out and he goes, "Hey, Carl, where's my cab?" And there was like no cab, so I pulled my New Yorker up, and I rolled down the window and I said, "Mine is faster, cleaner, and cheaper." And he got in the car, and I gave him a ride to his hotel, and that went on for a while. And he would just always make sure I had the closest table to the drums. And then one time, they were breaking in a new trumpet player. He just goes like, "Why don't you do it?" And I got up on the bandstand, and the bass player, Jim Cannon, says, "Just stick with me, it'll be fine." And I broke in a trumpet player with his band on his drum set on the most famous tune.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And now at this time, we would like to feature at the drums, Mr. Sonny Payne.
Sonny Payne was the drummer for Count Basie. Among other things, you can find other recordings that he's on. The Hart Music Center hired Sonny Payne one year to come and give a drum clinic. Mickey had gotten into a fight with his father and moved into my house. Lived downstairs in the basement with me. My parents were upstairs and blockaded as much as possible. So the clinic came around when Sonny was supposed to come into the store, but Mickey couldn't go in the store at the time. I had Mickey's key, and I was teaching Mickey's students. There was a bunch of students there, and one of the students actually we gave free lessons to, who didn't have any money, was Michael Shreve, who later became the drummer in Santana. So now Mickey and I went to the Carousel Ballroom. We watched the performance, and afterwards we're on stage with Sonny. He's breaking down his drums, and we're kind of standing on stage with him, and this guy calls over and says, "Hey," like that, and I go over to the edge of the stage. He said, "My name is Billy Kreutzmann, and I'm the drummer in a band called the Warlocks." and I want to meet Sonny Payne. And I go over to Mickey and Sonny, and they're like, yeah, sure. Billy gets up on the stage, and we all get talking to him. Somehow or another, it leads to us going out to Mickey's car, where we always had practice pads. And we took out our sticks, and we played one of these solos. So Connecticut halftime starts off like 7, have some paradiddles. It's like, you know, something like that, okay? So Mickey and I played this for Sonny and for Billy, only back then we used to do it one hand each. Clean as a whistle. Billy's mouth fell open, sort of like the way mine did the first time that I saw Mickey play. And he said, you know, can I get some lessons? So now Mickey started, he was living in my house, sleeping in my basement on my couch. Pretty soon he was going there and staying there, like for a couple days and more days. And this went on for like a couple weeks, or maybe, I don't know, a month, where I didn't see him all the time. And then he was like living there, and they changed their name to the Grateful Dead. And the Carousel Ballroom, which was owned by the Jefferson Airplane, and the Dead sold that, this is later now, to Bill Graham, and it became Fillmore West. So Carousel became Fillmore West. The Warlocks became the Grateful Dead. Mickey became the second drummer in the Grateful Dead. They have 2 drummers. Right around that time, things were coming to a head in my family life at that house. I couldn't live there anymore. After basically being completely my own person from the time I was 8, suddenly my stepfather said he was going to discipline me. And I'm like, no. And I opened the door and I ran up the street with him chasing me, and I hid in a truck. There was sort of like a constellation of houses that members of the Dead lived in. Mickey lived in a place in Novato, California. A few miles from there was Jerry Garcia's live-in recording studio. And then there was Billy Kreutzmann, who had a track house and lived with a wife who was a speech therapist. I think he and I were more alike in that way, like we just wanted a provincial life. If we could have the life of a banker, but be a musician, that would be ideal, you know. Bob Weir was his own poet, his own man. We didn't have a lot to communicate or talk to, probably more we would have now. And then Phil Lesh was the bass player. And Phil Lesh loved classical music. He rewarded himself with an orchestral score after every concert with the Grateful Dead. Really good friend, and was involved in a lot of peripheral projects that I did with them. At the beginning, no, and further on in a scary way. What people called rock and roll was just eighth notes, you know. And jazz was triplets. Right? I knew that the scene in San Francisco was changing. The jazz scene was kind of drying up and getting more expensive. You know, you had to go there and get thrown out after 45 minutes for the next crowd. You know, it's like the scene was changing. I didn't really think about it. I was playing all the time, and I didn't care whether the molecules were moving in triplets or 16th notes, as long as they were moving. So I didn't see it as a threat. I didn't see it as a joy. And I was hiding out. For the first couple of days, I was waiting for the police to show up or something. I called my mother and my father, and I said, look, I could go on the road with a band. There was a band going on the road. I could go on with them. I said, I can finish school on my own. I have a place to stay. I didn't tell them I was in a more stable environment than living with them. Mickey had, you know, with all his military background and everything like that, it was safe for me. I felt very safe in that area. I just didn't feel musically charged. They had reported me as a runaway, so we met at the police department in Burlingame, California, and we sat at a table, and the cops were really cool, actually. They were like, okay, you know, your son seems to be in good situation. And they dropped it, and that was the end. I never, ever had anything to do with them for the rest of their life. Mickey informed me that the Jefferson Airplane was having a drummer problem, that there were 2 Spencers, and the one who was a mate to Grace Slick, he was living in the mansion, and upstairs, and he never wanted to see a drum set again. As Billy says in his book, I got that job that year And Mickey gave it to me. He said, just show up there, and they're rehearsing, they're working on this and that. We had a gig every Tuesday night at the Carousel. So I was like playing with them and still playing my jazz gigs where I could and everything else. The clock was on. There was no moment in my life that wasn't being translated rhythmically, whether I was walking down the street or whether I was playing a gig or who I was doing. So when you're playing, during those moments, you don't know whether you are playing with Andrea Bocelli, the Pope, the San Francisco Symphony, or whatnot. Like when I started playing with symphony and those kinds of things, I was suddenly really in new water. But underneath the surface was, again, being in this wave of rhythmic motion. And as long as I'm on that wave, then whatever is on the surface, whatever mask is on top of that, is just a matter of a local challenge of dealing with the local situation. I just knew that what I was doing was losing its flavor. The music wasn't becoming less flavorful. The life that went with it was one where the end result was a shortened lifespan, a candle that was burnt at both ends. I know that my stepfather was very disappointed when I got involved in classical music. We saw each other like when we threw my stepsister's ashes off David Crosby's boat. He was very disappointed that I was pursuing this other path. Jazz is triplets. Classical music has plenty of triplets. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, so there is no such thing. And I was trying to understand music from a historical perspective. Before it was just the food that I ate, it was the food that was on the table. I felt like just thinking about him that it spread out almost like water would spread out. It's not one simple focused thing, because what happened is I spent a year with one of his students preparing to audition for him. I played for him. I had some scales to play on marimba and xylophone, which was relatively new. I had not taken that instrument too seriously. But he accepted me as a student, and shortly afterwards I was told that to get into the conservatory I needed a high school diploma. And he wrote them a letter, and he basically asked them to take me in without the diploma, but to give me a full load as if I was a matriculated student, and that I would fulfill the high school diploma as they requested through a GED. I didn't really feel at that time that I was embarking on what was going to be such an important journey. I wasn't even quite sure that I was going to make it in that world of classical music. So I went to my lessons, and I loved that rarefied atmosphere of a conservatory. It really is a conservatory. You feel like you're a rare plant that's being protected. I think I just loved breathing the air, going there early in the morning and go up to the percussion room. Our lessons were long. If you made a mistake, he would sit you down and say, "You know, Michael, a human being needs 80 grams of protein a day." And he would say, "Are you sleeping?" And it's just really nice. Our lessons could go for 3 hours. And they always had stories about his teacher, Saul Goodman, in New York at Juilliard. So I guess I just suddenly felt that I had arrived in a place that was so high and so special. We would go to a restaurant sometimes, like a nearby Chinese restaurant. If somebody walked in, he had to know who it was. He had to look at every sound, everything that was slightly anomaly. I didn't realize at the time that he had any quirks. I thought he was the first normal artist that I ever met, and it was great to finally reach an artist who was a family man. His children were in Little League. He lived in a nice house outside of San Francisco with a wife who taught yoga.
Keep your eye on it now. Watch it hit your bed.
I was seeing a psychiatrist at the time, twice a week. I had gone to his house for Easter, and the whole thing was just idyllic. So much so that I broke down and I cried during the session because I wished that he was my father and that was my life. And I think I even told him, and he sort of was like, well, when it comes to this music, I am your father, kind of a vibe. Within my first semester, he got me appointed to teaching at the preparatory division and got me on playing extra in the San Francisco Symphony with Seiji Ozawa. So he trusted me musically. I was practicing my scales one time, and I couldn't think what I was doing. My mind was so elsewhere. Even the experience with psychotherapy, the first 6 months, I didn't even reach today. I was just dealing with garbage from my childhood. So I was playing marimba like crazy, just scales and scales and scales and scales and scale exercises. And I put down the sticks and I went down outside the room, down the hall where Roland was talking to somebody, and I waited for him to stop talking and said, Mr. Koloff, maybe I should take off for a semester because I don't know where I am. He shook my hand, and I didn't know how much he empathized with me at the time, but he said, you just go back there and keep practicing your scales, because when you get back, you're gonna have really good scales. So I just took it as a okay, that it didn't mean that I should take off for a semester and go, I don't know, find myself, as Kermit the Frog says, join Hare Krishna or something. Roland Koloff was reputed to be a master of the timpani, which of course has a very special place in the symphonic perspective. It's kind of the lion of the jungle. It plays, first of all, it's beautiful, it's big, it plays in tune, and I had never been involved in a drum that you have to tune in pitch and be simpatical with the violinist and other musicians, right? Now remember, when I first started playing piano when I was 3, when you went there, you know, it was like everything was like, right? That was the Mr. Leslie Grow experience. I really loved being part of that society. You have a lesson, you practice something, afterwards you get an ice cream cone dipped in chocolate, you know, the whole thing. And back then in the 2nd grade, I was being taken down the hall with a piano. They would wheel the piano down the hall to another room, and I would get to play for them. So I was like, kind of really felt special. So the idea of rubbing up against a person who was revered in the symphonic scene, to me represented the next step in my education. I graduated in 77, so I had to come out in like 74, 75, something like that. Yeah, I came to New York for an audition, an application, like $50 deposit, whatever, and a prayer. The night before, I stayed in a really pretty nice hotel, and it came with a Broadway show that had no music. I was grateful for that, called Sherlock Holmes. I'm glad I went to that because I got to see like New York stagecraft at its best. It had like a spiral staircase and Sherlock Holmes' famous loft that he played the violin in. I had a great time that night, but I tried to cram as much as everything I had learned at the Conservatory of San Francisco in my head. Brought one book, a book called Grout, and a practice pad, and I actually got on my hands and knees and I prayed at the end of the bed, just like a Norman Rockwell painting, and asked that I said I really wanted to get in, but that if I didn't, I would accept it. And I was leaving a lot of work. I was working a lot in San Francisco. I felt like pretty much the captain of the Queen's Navy. So part of me had a lot of confidence, and part of me felt like that same kind of imposter thing where I'm coming at this as a jazz big band drummer with a couple years of classical training and high hopes. And I go into the audition. There was a panel. There was Buster Bailey, and there was Saul Goodman, and there were a couple other people, 2 other people for sure. I only saw Buster and Saul. And that might be like the first time that I ever saw the Saul Goodman. And I began playing Prokofiev Violin Sonata in D. So I started playing this piece, and I started playing the first notes, and I just remember going like from, holy shit, here I am auditioning at Juilliard, to like, I felt good in my body and my hands, and the instrument felt good. And then I heard either Buster or Saul, I don't know which one, say, "Nice touch," to each other. And that just melted the ice even more. And I just continued to play until they had heard enough. And then I went over to the instruments that I really felt good about. Everything was just going so well. It was a little dreamy, actually. They loved my playing. And I went through the snare drum stuff. And then I went over to the timpani, which was Saul Goodman's, the instrument he was most famous for. And I played some of his etudes that he had written in his book. And I felt really good about it. And he loved it too, because he said, quote, "You are special." I'm going, this is just too good to be true. And I walked out of there, he said, "You're going to play in the orchestra, you're going to do this and that." It's an application for scholarship. He said, "I'm approving the application, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks or a month," or whatever it was. And I went back to San Francisco and started packing my bags. There were some questions on whether they wanted to accept all my credits from the conservatory. I heard that I might even have to get an extra year, but nothing happened exactly like that, and I didn't care. I had arrived, and I walked into my first lesson, and it was going to be Beethoven's Symphony No. 1. What a great place to start. It starts off with, there's a forte timpani note. Goodman used to say, he never said it to me, but he said it to other students, he used to say, "Hit the goddamn thing." And I smacked that sucker. I went, "Boom," and he stopped me. And he said, "It's only Beethoven's first." Back then, the orchestra was only 17, 18 people. It's not until the Third Symphony, which is, by the way, the one that was a response to Napoleon. So instead of ba, it was like ba, da, da. Yeah. I got the idea. And we went to the whole piece. There were notes about stick changes and a few things. There were places where I could let it ring, and there were places, I had done my homework. I knew when the orchestra was ringing. I wanted to demonstrate my muffling technique and all of the techniques that go into timpani playing, the fundamentals. For then and the next several years, he never stopped me. But during the playing, while I was playing, he would say things like, "Anger!" Or he would say, like bells in the distance, ringing in the mountains, in the Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Da, 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 da. You'd play the timpani like with that in mind. We began a weekly lesson. Beethoven first, went to Beethoven second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, nine. From Beethoven, we went to Brahms, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a whole symphony. And then I would play mallets for him as well, and snare drum. So all I could say is that this went on, and like on the third year, maybe, he invited me to come to his house for the lessons instead of the studio. And I arrived at his house. I was wearing a suit to my lessons. I was so uptight. Everyone else was dressed casual. It wasn't a casual experience for me. And I showed up, at 10 o'clock in the morning, and he handed me a shot of whiskey. And he said, "You need to relax." There was a humor to everything. And yet, if you look at the 300 recordings that he did with Bernstein and others, it's a lot of serious music. Heads of state, funerals, all of these things. So he was on the spot. He was always on the spot, but he was always, as he liked to say, in control of his destiny. Play as if your life depended on it, but that you were in control of your destiny. And I don't know if he brought that out in me then, but it certainly blossomed in my life since then.
And just a gigolo, everywhere I go.
I called Mel Rodman, who had given me some work. He called me and gave me a job with the D'Oyly Carte Opera Company. In 1976, the English sent the D'Oyly Carte Opera, which was Gilbert and Sullivan's company, to America, and we played at the Uris Theater for a couple of weeks, and I fell in love with the music and the whole experience. So I called Mel because I thought Mel represents the biggest contractor in New York, and maybe he sees a future in me. And I told him that I was just offered Louis Prima, Sam Butera, and The Witnesses in Vegas, and he just flat out said, "You don't belong in Vegas. Come back to New York." But before you do, I want you to go down to Los Angeles, where Bill Livornia, who was Judy Garland's drummer and had basically raised Liza Minnelli on his knee, they're working on a show called The Act, which is going to come to New York. And he had had a massive coronary, and he was back to playing again, but she wanted him to have the license to just put down the sticks at any moment and have the percussionist move over and sit in his place. So my job was to know his job and my job. He looked like a character in a Louis L'Amour book, and talked that way, and he says, "So," goes, "do you like sushi?" And I said, "I think that sushi is one of the guideposts on the road to enlightenment." I think I got the job at that moment. I had been working in The Act with Bill Livornia. We had become friends, and he wanted to take me out for my birthday. And then when we ate at most of the time was a sushi restaurant called Sushiko, which at that time was the best Japanese restaurant. He went there many times with Liza. So we went there, and we sat at the counter, like we always did, and next to me was Minako. I liken that to the story of Ruth, and Boaz and Ruth, where she just happened, it says so in the story, in the book of Ruth, it says, he happed by, She happened to be sitting next to me, and sitting next to her was a guy with gray hair, who I was hoping wasn't her date, this old guy. The guy who was with her was sent by the father. He was here on business. He said, "Check up on my daughter, maybe you could have dinner." I saw the violin at her feet, and I heard the word Juilliard. They were speaking Japanese. And I started talking to her, and then I kept talking to her. I got her phone number, which she must have wrote down wrong or something, because I ended up writing her a letter instead. And she contacted me, and we arranged to have lunch at Fiorello's across the street from Juilliard. And we had a really great lunch, and she had a rehearsal at 1 o'clock, and I think we had lunch till like 2 minutes to 1. It was maybe the only time that she was ever like dangerously on time to a rehearsal at Juilliard. We continued to see each other, and a fairly short period of time afterwards, unbeknownst to her parents, I cleared out a closet and I said, "This closet's yours if you want." And at the end of the dinner, Bill Livornia, who had been completely ignored and had to pay the tab, says to me, "Don't ask me to play for the wedding." My father-in-law pegged me as somebody who liked Japanese women. So I'm going to admit there was an aspect of it was that like she was this really beautiful Japanese young woman, and I thought she was really, beautiful. One of my criteria and my hopes in life was to meet somebody who had something going for them. It wouldn't have been enough if she was just a pretty Asian woman. That probably wouldn't have got us over the last 43 years. I guess just things all added up right then. There was a violin and Juilliard and beautiful, and no wonder Bill said that. So all of those things. I sensed that she had a lot of depth, and that she was a lot of fun, and she was kind of like, laughed and really alive and kind of fun sounding. The violin in Juilliard, it was a hint that I should have realized right then that she was going to be better musically. She has perfect pitch. She played more notes this morning than a percussionist plays in a year. They're all fast, they're in tune and crazy good. And she does come to me for certain rhythmic observations sometimes when she's playing. So I have one avenue in which she might actually defer, but only because I studied so much. One thing, it came out in her playing, she won the Hindemith violin concerto at Juilliard. And it's one of the things where the percussionists are back there, they're playing, and the piece is really hard. It's in 5/8 and 3/8 and 4/8 and 4/4, so you're going like ding dong ding it boom boom duck it duck it duck it duck it da. She is playing the violin like it was a bird flying free, no bar lines, no time signature change. You don't hear when it goes into 7/8. You know, 1 2 we're at 3 8 to 7 8 would be, you know, 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 1, and she's just like, you know, like just like one long beautiful line. How she could do that even back then, I didn't see that when we were sitting at the sushi counter, but there was a chance that she was the real deal. It would be somebody who had something going for her. There's a contradiction there because in the marriage psychology course that I took, right, you learn that when you're an individual, that's one thing, but when you get married, you're no longer an individual, you're a duad. But at the same time, I wanted her to have something that she could call her. God bless the child who's got their own, right? And so we continued our relationship, and occasionally we performed together. We actually had performed together before I even met her at Juilliard. We did Alexander Nevsky. She was in the orchestra, but she's in the violin section. It's about a huge orchestra, and I was in the back, and we found out we actually were in the same concert before we met. She had to sort of play me down with Joseph Fuchs. Joseph Fuchs was the 5th floor of Juilliard. Saul Goodman was the 3rd floor of Juilliard. And for me, it enhanced my life. I believe that it gave joy and lift to everything that I did. And I think she could probably say that I've pretty much completely devoted since that first moment that we met. So everything was more fun, had more bounce to it. I didn't look for chances to play together. In that way, she was in another world. It wasn't percussive, it wasn't percussion. And if she was playing in the same orchestra, that just didn't mean anything. We just met afterwards on the breaks. I believe what Roland Koloff said, that we were made to go through life 2 by 2. And she was the other part. She fulfilled me in that way. She completed me in that way. I certainly didn't feel like I had to look for anything else. I just basically thought about ways to be entertaining and not bore her. I think I was in a kind of ecstasy, joy. I didn't really need anything. Just to give you an example, we recently, a couple years ago, first time I went to Italy to take my piano lesson, we had to get off the plane. The plane had a mechanical error, and we got off the plane. They put us in a motel for the night near the airport before going to Italy. Well, this airport, first of all, had a great breakfast in the morning. Their muffins were like, I still haven't forgot how good they are. But so I'm locked in a room with Minako overnight in Queens instead of Italy. Now, I have a feeling she was probably like, gosh, I wish we were on the plane going to Italy. I didn't care. I was so happy. I felt like I was still on my honeymoon. Like, that's the way I feel when I'm with her. There's romantic love, and there's altruistic love, and there's taking care of the bills. There's a word for it, like taking care of business part of love. I think that in that way we're really good for each other. Like the ways that I'm disorganized about time and chronology and dates and whatnot, she's really good at. When I talk about how we met, it's very romantic to me. It's like biblical, and for her, it's like, oh, we met at a Japanese restaurant. It's okay. I wanted to live a fairly provincial life, even though I'm a musician. I didn't want to be on the road all the time, and she gave me that a way to be centered and grounded. Because I think I would have been roaming a lot otherwise, not just to find companionship, but maybe she gives the notes meaning.
It's Liza with a Z, not Lisa
Liza with a Z. She was very particular about that. She was like a flower that didn't blossom till it walked on stage. Period. She was shorter than me, but she had what our dance teacher, Minako, one time taking dancing one lesson, and he was telling me how to look taller. Liza was gigantic when she walked on stage. Her legs looked so long, and she was so powerful. She had great time, which made it fun for a drummer. See, there's a point at which when you're with somebody like that, they cut time like the best stone cutter in the world. It is indelible. the band would walk out little by little, one at a time. Frank Porowski, different people like playing while she's just saying hello to the audience. And they'd walk out and they'd be like playing a few notes, kind of bluesy kind of thing, you know. And then the other musicians would walk out one by one, and then she would say, I have these people here, and I just want you to know that it's a miracle. And suddenly the whole world was like, you know, and it took off from then. So what was it like? To me, I have to evaluate what it was like to be with her, like in the performance situation. It was so beautiful and powerful, and everything you did was great.
Michael!
Even a few big mistakes I made a big mistake, and instead of a flute solo, they ended up with a big, huge timpani roll. And sing, but she would just giggle. She'd go like, oh, you know, like, and she would play with it. There was like nothing you could do that was wrong. And if you said to her, you were so amazing, she'd be like, really? She'd shrink and like feel, and it was genuine. There was one scene in the show where the dancers picked her up and would spin her around like a wheel, like an arrow on a game board. And they would spin her around, and during that part, they inserted a pre-record of her voice because her voice would be screwed up going spinning around like that. The guy who was supposed to push the button at the right time was out getting stoned, and he didn't make it back. She was totally cool with it. She would come out about 8:05 every night, which would give me time to leave I was on a platform, we were on stage, the band, and Bill Livornia was on his platform. And he was a big guy, and he had a big tuxedo jacket. And I would go over, and it was hot. I think he had his jacket off, and I had my jacket off over the drums or something. And Liza one night walks out at 8 o'clock instead of 8:05. So I grabbed the jacket, and it turned out Bill's jacket, and I run over to my station. I get up on the platform, and I put it on in the sleeves. I come down to here, and I grab some timpani mallets, and this conductor, Stanley Lebowski, he was so mad at me that at the end of the first act, somehow or another, I get off the thing, and he comes over to me, nose to nose. I swear I could feel his nose in my face, Stanley, and go, you get out here at 5 to 8, and you be ready to play, and you don't do anything. And like, I apologized, and he was like, really, I thought I would never work again, the way he yelled at me. And they're all like, oh, he yells at everybody that way, don't worry about it. But then when they needed somebody in the movie All That Jazz, Stanley called me, and when they needed somebody for the musical later on, Singing in the Rain on Broadway, Stanley called me. So I guess he felt I was well trained. While I was still in school and taking my lessons, I got the idea of going and playing in the street, which wasn't common then. There was a shopping cart, and drummers used a thing called a trap case, which is why they called Buddy Rich Traps the Boy Wonder. And I would wheel down Broadway, and I would go usually to 50th and Broadway. I had 5 or 6 locations, and I would set up my whole drum set, big setup, like as big as you need for anything. And I would just set up on the street and start playing. What I was doing is playing much like my influences of Buddy Rich and Louis Bellson on the drum set. And I would just blow my brains out, try to make sure that I took time for some dynamics and demonstrated that I could also play soft and delicately and all of that. It's storytelling, and it can be as dramatic or as pastoral as you can imagine. I went out about 100 times that I know of, because I would come home and I'd write down how much money I made. And I know that 2 pockets, if I fill these pockets, well, probably bigger by size of 2, but if I fill these pockets with quarters, it comes to about 60 bucks. Okay, I think I wear smaller pants then. But occasionally people would give me not quarters, they would give me a $5 bill or $10 bill. I might have got a 20 once in a while. People were passing by. Cats was playing across the street. Drummers who I later became colleagues would walk by and they'd just nod at me and whatnot. One day, this guy standing, leaning against the corner of 50th, he calls me, he goes like this, like he's a conductor, so I guess I know how to respond right away. So I get up from the drums and I go over and he says, can you read? And I said, I could read anything I just played. And he said, because I'm conducting a show at the St. James Theatre. My name is Paul Gemniani. I could introduce you to some people who are more established than you, which is so ironic because I was as established as you could be on 50th and Broadway. What I should have thought is, wow, that's really nice. He might be bullshitting, but it's really nice of him to say that. And I went home. Minako and I were already dating at the time. I don't think I told her about it. I think it's about 2 months later, a month or two later, I open up the paper and there's a 2-page ad that says, closing such and such a date, Imogene Coca, St. James Theatre, Paul Gemniani on a 20th century. And I was like, maybe I should go down there. I went down there and he says, oh yeah, go downstairs. The drummer, Nick Serrato, has been waiting to meet you. And I went down and Nick gives me a hug and says, oh yeah, he says, I've been waiting to meet you. How is Saturday night? Like, this was like Wednesday. I'm not even sure I knew what he meant, but he handed me the book. And I went home. I set up a rubber practice pad set in the bathroom of the studio apartment. It's like the sink, the bathtub, my foot, a couple pads, a fake hi-hat. And I went into practicing the overture and Minako was watching me. I must have had some excessive confidence because I played the overture 3-4 times and then I turned the page to go on. She said, it's not good enough yet. When you go in and you play a show that's already established, you have to cultivate liking, having a gun pointed at your head that can go off for any reason or no reason at all. You're walking into a book that somebody has already carved in stone. I went down there and I sat down and I started playing, and all I remember looking back at it after all these years is places where, because it's about a train, where you have to go ding, 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 ding on the 20th century. I don't even relate. I do in like this show West Side Story maybe, but I don't relate physically. I can usually imagine and remember what it felt like physically to play my part. It just happened. Harriet, one of the clarinet players, took me aside and said, do you know how special you are? And she was like so sweet. And then I went to the bathroom and the trumpet player says, you're doing great, kid, except you follow the conductor too much. Really nice thing to hear on your first show. I never forget that. I got the call from Stanley Lebowski, who I mentioned earlier. I thought by now he must hate me because of that incident with me being not on the bandstand when Liza walked out that one time. But I was willing to fall on my sword even for one mistake because I knew the samurai ethic, you know. But he called me and he said they're doing this movie and they need a drummer on the set. And can I get out there like, I don't know, in half an hour or something like that. And it seemed like I had to get out there right away. So I go out and there's a drum set waiting for me, and Stanley Lebowski is on stage on the set, and they had duplicated one of the famous dance rehearsal studios that every dancer on Broadway knows. They know the smell of it and the elevator and everything. So they had completely, at the studio in Queens, where I came in, they were doing a scene where the producers within the show, it was about Bob Fosse as a choreographer, producer, and the show was a bitter denunciation, a diatribe against certain show business attitudes who just care when they're making a commercial, they don't care about anything. There's a running choreography throughout the movie where they're working on the scene, and instead of the scene being exactly what the advertisers wanted, they called it Air Erotica.
Welcome aboard Erotica.
And they made it seem like there were these hostesses and stuff on the airline that were actually turned out to be like a way to slap them in the face, basically. It was more than that. But in it was a band playing, and I was the drummer. I wasn't supposed to stand out. But then there was this one thing where you had to dig in a little bit, and Bob Fosse stopped the movie stopped the thing and said, I want to spend some time. And he dismissed the rest of the band and just spent time with me and drumming. And I remember one of the dancers, I think her name was Sandal or something, said, you don't even look like a drummer. Like they couldn't believe that I could drum, really drum. They just thought I was a prop. You know? So then I spent a lot of time doing different solo kind of noise, energy. It was kind of intense because the scene always ended up with most of the people losing their clothes, which meant that every stagehand, every sound man, every gaffer was hanging from the rafters trying to see the scene go down. And the scene goes throughout the movie. It's building and building and building until he's managed to completely insult everybody appropriately.
No, Sinatra will never record it.
So did I like the movie? I loved being on it. I got to make a lot of noise. When I wasn't being filmed, then it was my turn to sit at the big round table with Roy Scheider and, you know, Anne Reinken, all these people who were the stars of the movie.
That jazz.
Apocalypse Now. At the time, it was the most expensive movie ever made, potential disaster. And I didn't know who Francis Coppola was, but it wasn't until Mickey told me who he was that I was like, oh, it's a big deal.
Francis came to see me at Winterland, and he said I wanted my movie to sound like that, the drums in space, drums in Grateful Dead concert. He said, I want you to go up the river, just, you know, after Kurtz. I took all of my percussion instruments and called Airto and Michael Hinton and different percussionists that I thought would be able to make the trip up the river.
I went to the Juilliard Library and I took out some books on film composing, as if you could learn on a 6-hour flight to California. And I read a couple things in there that were actually very helpful. Coppola and Mickey locked me and Airto Moreira, the Brazilian master percussionist, in a room, in a barn that we began the work in before moving into Jerry Garcia's studio for the actual recording.
It took me 2 weeks to just set the mics where everybody can actually play any instrument in this giant room without having to set anything up. I mean, no matter what you felt, you could go to any part of the room. So I took my whole collection and put it out and made sure it was all mic'd so we could just walk through this forest of percussion and improvise our way up the river.
Me and Airto were put in this barn, and Mickey said, I'm going to go out and gather more instruments. So he was gone, like, from almost all the time for each of those days. It was just me and Airto, who at that time didn't know each other at all. Then we went in the room and we started watching the movie, and the movie at the time just had ambient sounds, and we were supposed to come up with a percussion-based soundtrack. So we watched the movie a couple times, and then at one point something happened, and I had a clipboard where we had this hundredths of a second, and at a certain point either me or Airto went like, and that became like the first sound that we made, and we wrote that down like a mark and a line, how long it should go and what it was going to, just represented it in our mind, and we liked it. And then we kept doing that. We just kept adding throughout, we just kept watching the movie and adding sounds in our mind that we imagined. And I had like different lines with different sounds and different marks of where it was. This went on for 3 days. Somewhere in that first day, in the first 4 or 5 hours, Airto looks at me, because he was a big shot. He was really famous. Him and Flora Purim played with Miles and played with everybody, Chick Corea and all that stuff. And I was just this guy from Juilliard, you know. So he looks at me at one point and he goes, I could work with you. But he did it with that Brazilian accent that he had, so I felt pretty good. Should have said I could work with you too. And Coppola supplied anything you could want, you know, lots of toys, Viet Cong pajamas if you wanted to wear them to really get into the role. Coppola begged us to help articulate what he thought wasn't coming through in the movie.
We're all going to sit around and we're going to talk about what the rhythm tracks have to do for the picture at the key part in the film where they really take over. Because the music up until that time sounds like all kinds of things, and it involves lots and lots of synthesis and what have you. It builds a big schmaltzy Puccini, gets really like an opera. And when the kid dies, And then from that moment on, you're in another dimension of the film, and you start to sense the rhythms. And these are the primitive rhythms that stay and dominate the track musically from that point until the killing of Kurtz.
He wanted to embellish the helicopter noise with something acoustic, so we got all those plastic tubes that you go like that. By then we had moved into Jerry Garcia's studio. He had mascots of the Hells Angels. The Hells Angels were self-appointed mascots of Jerry Garcia and his anything having to do with him. And they would like hang out. They would circle the place and just, I don't know. I don't even know. I was there working on the movie, but I did notice that peripherally that the Hells Angels were like always available. And so we went out and got them, brought them into the studio and gave them tubes to do with the helicopter noise. They were supposed to play 15 minutes of sound that wasn't looped. That was the idea. We didn't want it to be a loop. So we got them in a circle with these tubes, and these guys who looked like something out of a Hulk movie were like falling apart. Not one of them made it 15 minutes. So we all took turns keeping these tubes going and recording it and adding it to the helicopter noise to make it more, I don't know, something. And the SMPTE kept breaking down back then. It was a very temperamental machine. It took like 45 minutes every time to get everything in sync. And we're like making up sounds. So you'll see in the pictures so many instruments, peanut shells to walk through the mud where he was going to decapitate that guy who was in a cage. And the movie was very hard to watch. I remember the first time we had to watch, they butchered an oxen or something in the movie. I mean, I must have watched the movie 100 times. And then, you know, we were figuring out what to do for the movie. And I remember at the beginning of those scenes, I wanted to look away. And by the end, I was like into it. It's really... Coppola at one time was explaining that the movie has this rise and fall and reaching a climax. And that's when he said, all movies are sex. He dealt with so many obstacles in making this movie. It almost killed him. Was it worth it? In the same way that many artists have to, I don't know, smell paint thinner or something, I guess it's worth it. He was really a kind person. He was in physical pain, apparently. He didn't moan and groan, but he was just so kind to us. And when he showed up, it was just to bring us goodies. And he just sat there with us. What a nice person. What an incredible thing. And the movie, I've only watched it after it was all done. When we were doing it, I watched it so many times. After it was all done, it definitely captures the futility, the senselessness of the war itself, the insanity of the people, that kind of cult worship. In a really great way, I felt like I had made it.
Love's a winner.
Yeah, after the act closed, continued to spend about 2 months a year with her traveling around. I was thrilled because when it closed, I thought it might have been it. It would have been enough because we were on stage with her every single night, and I got to watch what it was like to see a consummate performer step on stage and just blow everybody's mind away night after night. I don't know where we went first. The African one is important because when we got to the end of 18 days in Africa, Elliot Wiseman pulled us together and said, we're not going to Italy at this point, and we don't even know if we're going to go. And in the meantime, we're going to sit here and stay put. I didn't mind. I had a beautiful bungalow on the 9th or the 18th hole of a golf course in a resort where I could go out in the morning and follow baboons around into the forest until I was told it wasn't safe. Working with Liza after the act closed, I was always thrilled to get the call. It meant flying executive class or sometimes chartering a plane. We went to Hawaii, for instance. Miniko went with me. When we were in Florence, we took sightseeing trips to Siena and just everywhere. I loved having the free time. When we went to Australia, for instance, the second day she rented a yacht and took the whole band out cruising outside the Sydney in the Bay. Since we had already done most of our rehearsing in New York, we just had a sound check. She wasn't into overworking. One time in Manila, for instance, we were at the Manila Hotel, and that was my first time to see a bar in the middle of a swimming pool, and she had a beautiful penthouse that came with a big collection of armor. Like it was like being at the museum. In the middle of a party that she threw up in her room, she decided she wanted to have a piano, so she called room service and ordered a piano. And that put our piano player to work. They were always overworked at the parties because she would start to get ideas. And we would just be sitting around having fun. She would pontificate about her ideas about art. One time she said that art should disturb you. That was her thing at the moment. I would say that Liza, more than anyone else, really wanted not just to be a part of the band, but to kind of spoil us, to make us feel good, even over the top. If it was your birthday, for instance, and you were in the band, you just got treated like royalty. I think maybe having a showbiz upbringing, I would have to surmise that Vincent Minnelli, her father, wasn't around a lot, and I think that she related to the people, especially beginning with Bill Livornia, as really as family. As a matter of fact, the more I think about it, it really touches my heart, because there were situations where I just loved her. I just would do anything for her. And Minako felt the same way.
I always have some opinions, whether I express it to him or not, depends. But in general, I more and more, I just enjoy the way he plays and practices. I play a melodic instrument. I had a lot of opinions, but much less so now. Pretty much all the time, I'm impressed with his playing. I thought, wow, this guy can play. And I remember that day very well.
Every time she played, and to this day, if you light a piece of incense and you're in a dark room and you go like this, right? How it makes, like, it even has like a line left over in it. That was the way I felt like your lines were on the violin. Just moving like freely in space and melodically unreachable, just so beautiful. It explained why you were at Juilliard and why you were studying with Joseph Fuchs, who could also play that way. And it just baffles me.
I didn't learn to read first. I learned to play by just osmosis, by hearing. So I don't think of notes so much when I play. I just think of what I hear in my head as a melody. You do what you have to do, because you know, we live in an area where things are kind of expensive, so you have to work a lot. Kids have, you know, music education, sports education, and good schooling, and all that. So it wasn't so much planning. I think it was just out of necessity that we tried to manage the best we can.
I had this dream of getting like an RV, you know, of some kind, and parking it outside the stage door and just raising the kids there, you know, so, and they have to be able to come into the theater and hang out and like maybe sit in, you know, and stuff like that.
I think in the beginning, before the kids were born, he was doing great. You know, he had one of those, at the time I think was called Walkman, Sony Walkman, and he would just constantly be listening to some tape and repeating words, and he was doing fantastic. And he thought, correct me if I'm wrong, he thought that if I kept up with Miyuki when she was born, that he would just become fluent, just as she became fluent in Japanese, you know, as she grew up. Wasn't quite so.
Yeah. She
but-
actually said to me one day when she was about 5, she said, we were in an elevator, and she said, Mom, you have to teach Dad how to speak Japanese.
The effort that you made, you know, made all the difference. I think it paid off. You know, I hope she feels that way. I think he was part Japanese, or maybe all Japanese in his past life. He had always like just a hint of Japanese heart. He has more appreciation for Japanese culture than I do in some ways.
There was this long thing in Les Mis. It was like, and I asked her one time, I said, does it sound like an F? Because I was trying to make it sound like an F because the orchestra was in
On
F.
timpani, yeah.
No, this was on a floor tom, this was on drum
Oh.
set. And she says, well, she goes, it would work as an F or an F sharp. Those are like moments that I can remember in our playing together. Oh, and then, okay, when I started playing orchestral stuff, it was an symphony orchestra, right? And I was newer to classical music gigging than she was. She did all her life. So when I started playing this orchestra, like every time that we rehearsed, there would be like a little moment where I wasn't quite sure, and I would sort of test the water a little, which you don't do in an orchestra. So I'd like touch a little bit to see if that was my spot or something. And then she would come over afterwards and she would say, every single time, no matter how soft I did something that only I should have known, you know, she would come over from the violin section on the break and she'd say, you want me to ask the conductor to go over that section again? So, and there was like 3 years where I never ever didn't have that experience, you know, especially if I was doing an unusual piece.
That was her way of saying you screwed it up?
Yeah, she's saying like, I heard you over there, you know, like, you know, pretending like maybe I came in, maybe I didn't, you know, just in case I was supposed to come in there. We were doing a lot of repertoire that I hadn't done before, and playing timpani in an orchestra was I was totally faking it. I mean, it wasn't like playing drum set in a big band. So those 3 years we always had those conversations almost every single time.
I don't remember.
Yeah, of course not.
In my own way, I think it really boils down to just really listening and respecting the other person, you know. Yeah.
Is that getting easier for you?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Is that a parallel for a relationship?
I think it is. I think it is. And it's very hard to express yourself in such a way that the other person actually understands. It's not that easy, you know? It is nice to have that common topic that we enjoy talking about, which is music. And when we talk about music or different aspects of music, it's a nice feeling to feel like, okay, we are connected in that area.
When we talk about music, I feel like I hit a home run all the time because she'll ask me, we'll go to a concert, and she'll say, what did you think about this or that individual or whatever, and I seem to always echo her most inner feeling about the concert. I don't think we've ever been in a disagreement or feel like the connection wasn't deep. She'll say, oh, I feel the same way, and it's almost as good as when you laugh at my jokes.
I didn't understand rock and roll at all. I had no appreciation for it. You know, people just worship Grateful Dead. I had no feelings for it. I knew that they were very famous and admired, but I went there just because I was invited and it seemed like a thing to do. I think it all came from lack of understanding. I wouldn't say, you know, I had strong opinions or anything like that, but because I had no appreciation, I just thought, wow, it's loud. It's very loud. And what are all these people like waving their arms with a light? It would have been nice if I was impressed by it, by Michael's point of view, but I have to say I wasn't exactly impressed. Just I would say just because I didn't have a reference point in my life.
So you're glad he went a different way musically?
Yeah, I made sure he like went this way and not that way.
You mean I could have gone the other way?
Let's take this road.
I knew that I wanted a family. I wanted to do things differently than my parents had done. That was definitely part of my life plan in advance, even when before I met Minako. So we wanted a family, and so our first child, Miyuki, named by the grandmother. In Japan, the grandmother names the child. And Miyuki means a branch which bears fruit, taken from the Book of John. We began with her speaking Japanese on her second or third year, and she even told me that up until age 7, when we started making her do her homework and get on the bus at time, that she felt like she was living in heaven, that everything was so great. We had a lot of fun. She loved playing games where I was dismissed as a not welcome, like princess or whatnot. She'd say, "Daddy, you get out of here." A little while we imagined doing homeschooling. We were members of the zoo, the Museum of Natural History, the Metropolitan. We went there really like all the time, and we found Japanese mothers, 6 of them, who wanted to form a Japanese play group. And we met 3 times a week, starting when she was about 2 and a half. And once a week we would go on a field trip. And it went on for years. And that went on until Yoshi was born, and we had something similar for him. We were commuting, it was getting to be too much. We found an apartment in Palisades Park down the street here. And then she was going to preschool, which each year added a first grade and then a second grade ahead of her. And this went on for all of the 6th grade, and then junior high school, and then high school. It was a Japanese high school out in Westchester. Again, it was like a 100-mile commute every day when the buses stopped. And then, boom, college. So I think I really did a great job up until age 7 of keeping that Disneyland thing. I think Disneyland is underrated in a lot of ways. I think that some of the ideas that our children grow up with about happy endings and whatnot. My favorite song is Bare Necessities.
Forget about your worries and your strife.
Everybody wants to be a cat, right?
Everybody wants to be a cat.
So my kids grew up with that. My kids grew up with those songs. My children knew so many songs, all the Japanese songs that kids learn in the TV programs. We didn't have any kind of cable or anything like that. I had to rent or borrow everything that we watched on TV. It took a while to be forgiven for raising your kids with Japanese and English burden, the burden of both languages, and hoping that they could be eloquent in both. Yoshi, by the way, was really singled out and loved in his school. They were not ostracized for being half Japanese or any of that. They somehow knew how to finesse their relationships. Yoshi was picked to speak at the embassy. He had tons of friends, many potential girlfriends, but he was gay, so which I think I was figuring it out before he was. Like I said, well, you're going off to college now, and I hope you have a really great time making girlfriends and whatever, however I said it to him. And he called me back on the first semester. He says, I am, but not exactly like you, like you told me. So, but then I kind of had figured it out, you know. He had an uncanny ability to spell from an early age. So he was very, very great with words. He started translating, and he had a job on Madison Avenue, and at his funeral, or whatever you call it, it was more like a memorial thing, the publisher said that he was training Yoshi to take over a wing of this publishing company on Madison Avenue, translating Japanese to English or English to Japanese. I don't know, he did both. And with Miyuki, it took longer. I think she had some insecurities in the beginning, but her writing is beautiful now, and she's been published in the New York Times as a historian and involved in the #1 art book. So it took a little bit longer because of the two languages, I think, for them to feel confident and articulate in both languages.
They were not musicians.
Oh, no. I'm not one of these guys that has a lot of pictures of me with famous people, but I have a picture of me and my daughter on stage at a resort in the Catskills called the Homowack. Now, the Homowack was this place that looks like a tapeworm. It goes through a valley in the Catskills, and it was built like room by room, so that in order to get to the kitchen, or in order to get to the dining room, you have to go through the laundry, you know, and then there's rooms everywhere that you sleep in, and then there's a stage. And my friend Sam Ash, who used to love hearing me at weddings, he said, why don't you do a recital? And I talked Miyuki into doing it. Now, she was already playing piano. She played a Haydn trio in Japan when she was, I don't know, like 11 or something, 12, I don't know. And I didn't realize till recently, I was looking at a videotape of her doing it, that she walks out to play a trio, a Haydn trio, and I suddenly realized this recently, I mean like within this year, that she played it from memory. She just left the music on the stand. And I said, you never turn pages, you never, and she goes, oh yeah, I hate reading music. I mean, written music is a two-dimensional shopping list is what it is at best. So I get it, except that I didn't realize it at the time. So I talked her into accompanying me on a recital. So first day of the rehearsal for the recital, she hadn't practiced, and it really was scary. I was like going to cancel. Next day she was a little bit better, and the next day she was getting really good, and the fourth day I wasn't worried anymore, and by the time it was time to go up there, she was criticizing me. Yoshi also was a violinist. He played great violin. He played a concerto at our church, at the Leonia Presbyterian Church. And neither of them wanted to lock themselves up in a practice room, spend so many hours there. Very sociable, I think, very social people. And Yoshi knew it, he was, by the time, certainly by high school. He was involved in music projects at the school. He did fun stuff and wrote parts for everybody and sang and did all kinds of great stuff. They could have gone into music and surpassed me instantly, but Yoshi told me later on when he was sick that he had made up his mind in high school that he just wanted to hang out with friends and do things with your buddies, you know. And I totally get it, if you're that kind of person. And the science department wanted him to go into science, and he was a really beloved person and really great character. And what made me go back to the Leonia Presbyterian Church is that around the same time that I was asked to do the jazz jam there by Fumio, I was transferring videotapes, and up came Yoshi playing this concerto, playing really, really beautiful, and he's standing like right in the same spot where the Steinway is now and where I sit. Between the jazz jam and Yoshi playing there, we used to bring the kids there for Sunday school, but like a lot of parents, when Sunday school was over, we were kind of finished with the church, you know. I kind of decided then that kind of felt like I was getting reeled in. And now I love being a part of that, and I think Yoshi had a big hand in it. South Pacific, Beauty and the Beast, 9, Singing in the Rain, West Side Story, the act Sweeney Todd, They're Playing Our Song, Tap Dance Kid, Sunday in the Park with George, Song and Dance, and there's 2 or 3 others here, so a lot of them. I was still involved in school, and I stayed even a year after I got my master's, enrolled at Juilliard. And so I played Les Mis from I think I heard about it in 85, 86, and played it until 90, and then I started Miss Saigon. I was taken out of Les Mis while it was still running and moved to Saigon. Saigon then ran till 2000. When I first looked at the book, I'm going to talk about Les Mis, which was the first really long-running show. I didn't really know who Michel Schoenberg was. I thought maybe he was related to Arnold at the time. I took the recording, I ran home, I put the earphones on, and I got on my exercise bike. I think I probably was like really excited because he said the show's going to run for a long time. And I started pedaling on my exercise bike so hard and fast that I got tangled up in the wires, I remember, and like ripped my Walkman apart. That was my first day of finding out I was going to do Les Mis, and I think I was playing song and dance at the time, which I knew wasn't going to run forever, and I had a lot of fun doing song and dance. Andrew Lloyd Webber. I knew that, I knew what all the Broadway musicians know about him. Fun and intricate. I loved Bernadette Peters, and a matter of fact, Miyuki was in my arms at the time. She might have been, I don't know, nursing or a little bit right after that. Minako would go to the stage door with me, and Bernadette would be warming up. Bernadette would hold her, and we would like just hang out in Bernadette's room. That meant more to me, I think, than Andrew Lloyd Webber's music. But I had a busy part. I had lots to do, and I had some free moments. There were a lot of woodblocks in the show. Like she would say, "Mom," be like, "Mom," it'd be something like that, right? So that I could go and schmooze with my friends in the pit. I had woodblocks like all over the pit, and so I could just go over, clear on the other side, and my subs would come to watch, and they would say, "What are you doing? You have to play." I said, "It's okay, it's okay." That was just kind of more fun, frivolous almost. When I got the call for Les Mis, I had read the book, and the story was compelling. I personally liked it a lot. The orchestrator, for some reason, spilled a lot of ink up and down the staff like that, and I took him so literally that I bought a 10-piece drum set in order to reflect every note on the page. I practiced the heck out of the book, and I used the London recording, but it would be like, be like a boom, dum, dum, da dum, and then it would be like boom, dee da dee da dum. Well, the guy in London was like, his kind of vibe, I didn't do that. I felt like it was like in The Rite of Spring, there's a like, and it was such a deep story that I wanted to really dig in. So I had the low toms, and I would play, dun, 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 like that. And I took that to Washington, D.C. for the first rehearsal, and Bill Braun was there, and Michelle, everybody was there. It was at the Opera House. And I played those first notes, and they probably stopped to talk to the strings or something for a second. Bill comes over, he said, "I didn't think you were going to take me so literally, but I like it." And that was the beginning of a really nice relationship that led many years later, when they took me out of Les Mis, and my former student took over for me and put me in Miss Saigon. Same composer. My boss told me that, he said, "Just get Michael." And I have a book over there in the bookcase on the making of Miss Saigon, or the story of Miss Saigon, and they talk about getting together with me, and it says that I'm a freak on, I think they used the word Oriental, but I should have said East Asian percussion, and I speak Japanese, and I'm married to a Japanese, and he said, Bill Braun says, he's a Buddhist or Shinto or something. And I got together with the composer and the orchestrator. And I had all these instruments, and I played them for him, which was great because I was surrounded by percussion, tons of things to play. There were more timpani tuning changes and things to do in one night than you would do in a whole season with an orchestra. So I felt challenged, and so did all my subs. Saigon was coming to a close, and I'm at the end of one good run after another, and it seemed like if I was going to continue getting out there and making myself available, and I thought that it would be interesting to have a real teaching practice, and I got some books on business. I learned a lot, and I decided to take it seriously. My goal was to be able to take amateurs to play with high standards. I still to this day believe that a good amateur is better than a bad professional any day. Like the sax player in my band right now. He calls himself an amateur, but he's just fabulous. Things like that. And I made a really nice brochure, and I hung it around town, and a variety of people called. I pretty quickly had 40 students. I want a student that loves music. Could be any kind of music. All the doors, they all lead to Bach, whether they know it or not. Hopefully, I would have a student who's somewhat talented. I would prefer dedication more than talent. Talent is like having your yard filled with the best materials in the world, the finest marble, the finest glass and steel and materials and wood and everything. But it's not going to mean anything if you don't build it. You have to put it together. So I would like a student who's dedicated. I have one now who is, and he's really talented, so special. He's playing in the New Jersey Youth Symphony, and he played fantastic. They did part of Beethoven's 7th Symphony recently, and he looks like a symphonic timpanist. And I'm glad, because for a couple of years I was able to keep his wild side wild. I didn't want to put a lid on that. So easy to mistake your job for who you are. I don't think I would want any one kind of student. I love having a student like Shay, who's just got it all together, and his parents are on board. I think he's like a perfect example of what a teacher dreams for a student. Then I have a number of other students, as I like to think. Some of them are dilettantes, the ones that I keep in a noble sense, and amateurs who are going to play in church. And then I have ones that I'm just going to make sure that they're able to impart music to their children and their friends, and have a love of music and have some ability. And then I have a couple who they love studying drumming so much that I just say to myself that I'm preparing them for their next lifetime. Because they're a complete disaster in this one, but they're really dedicated. And they know it. I'm really brutally and lovingly honest. I never play anything the same way twice. I had a colleague who would, play, if he was going to play, every single night, he'd do it exactly the same every night. I never did that. He did it so much, he would run over to play on my instruments, and he would look at my music stand, and I put a sign on there one time that said, "Foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds." I was so inconsistent. One night it would be this, and the next night it would be this, and the next time it would be that, and the next time I would throw something. And I enjoyed that, and so did the conductors. I felt very close to them. What is the Theodore Dreiser story where she marries an actor and he kills himself at the end, and her marriage failed. She left her husband and she married somebody, and the reason was the husband comes home every day and does exactly the same thing. Puts his feet up on the thing, reads the newspaper, has dinner, falls asleep. You can be a good husband and walk in the door slightly different every night, right? How I apply that to being a percussionist is that there's really two things that predominate, and that is assessing the flow of rhythm, the wave of rhythm, like a flock of birds, a school of fish, and that's coming towards you, right? And as it comes towards you on one night, on Tuesday night, everybody's excited, maybe it's flowing a little bit too intensely for where the goal is, where the direction is going to be, and how it's going to land. One molecule of time coming towards you is like a duck in a shooting gallery. You're aiming at that duck. If you're really good at your craft, you can choose to hit the duck on the tail, like a Prisoner song. If you watch those Alan Lomax Prisoner songs, and those guys are chopping down a tree, and the time is by the tree, and their voice, Papa done. It's like, I don't want to hit the Steinway. Sorry. So, Papa done. It's like, grizzly bear. Papa done kill. And that beat is as laid back. You're hitting a duck right on the tail end. And you have to be able to do that every single time. But some days, that's not the thing to do. Some days, it's coming along and the whole thing feels kind of lugubrious and dull, and you need something, right? So what you do then is you hit it on the nose, you know, Papa Don, hit, you know, and then everything kind of goes like that. You know, you can really generate excitement, or you can generate tranquility, or you can just status quo. You can do all of those things on any given beat. And the beauty of it, and the reason why you never get bored playing the same show, is because it's exactly like your face. You can't see it unless you look in the mirror, but there's all this energy going on behind it. No matter what job I ever played in my entire life, I could account for every quarter note, every eighth note, every 16th note, every fermata, where I felt tension, where every single one, there isn't one note, like the best accountant in the world, like a penny. I could tell you every penny that went by in the show. To the extent that I made a business card once that said, Michael Hinton, accountant in the field of time. When I was in Les Mis, I started playing Jewish music. But it wasn't very much, and then it got to be more and more. First gig I played, I asked Yochi Brisman, how do I play Jewish music? And he said, just do whatever you want, make sure it sounds Jewish. And that was the beginning of a relationship. It led to concerts at the Metropolitan Opera House with like the biggest Hasidic people, you know, Mordecai Ben David and Avram Fried, all these names, I'm sure you know them. They fill it like the biggest places in the world in the Hasidic community. If I walked in a B&H photo, somebody would say, oh yeah, I know you, you played By My Cousin's Wedding. And then I told him what I do, he would say, why do you bother? First I hire a sub to go play the show. Meanwhile, I'm loading up the car with literally everything I own. And the reason is because, you know how when a kid goes out the door, they have to bring all their stuffed animals? All my instruments would be on the wall going, there'd be the tambourine I haven't used in a long time, like some esoteric tambourine, some big thing from the Middle East or something. And it'd say, bring me, take me. So little by little, like timbales and bongos and bongos that I could play with sticks and those things, those mark trees that people, I hate them. So I would bring 3 of them and then it got interesting. So it was like a jungle of sound. Those elements that you're working with were very exciting, and I seem to be working a lot with people who really loved drums and percussion. When the Barnum and Bailey Circus would come to town, I would play percussion, and my friend George Hooks would play drums. And George wanted to get out of the circus. He'd been in the circus for 17 years, and he was married or was going to marry one of the horse acrobat women, and they just wanted to bail. They didn't want to live on the train anymore. And I told Ari Pollock about that. And Ari Pollock used to be a drummer in Israel, but he became a guitar player, singer, and the leader of the Ari Pollock Orchestra. So when I brought George in to play, and we really tore it up. And he loved it because he was a former drummer. So he just let us out of our cage, and we went completely nuts, and the people always loved us and asked for us. We had more work than we could ever dream of. It was a genuine cultural ritual, and I didn't have to get on a plane to go there. All of the music, all the words come from Torah. And I made the same mistake I made with all cultures, including Japanese culture. I imbued this culture, because they were so steeped in Torah, as being flawless in some sense, you know, in terms of the way they govern their family and their life. And when a family that didn't have $250,000 to spend on the flowers would want me to come out and play at like Eden Palace, you know, and the waitresses are like wearing tennis shoes, and I would bleed for those people. Like when everybody went home and you get paid for 4 hours from 8 to midnight or something, and you were left with a mitzvah dance, we would just stay, and that's as you can imagine, we get home very late, because the mitzvah dance, everyone takes turns, and not until all the relatives dance one by one, holding to a rope to the bride, and finally, it could be 2:30, 3, 4, it could be 5 o'clock, the sun could be coming up, play places where they had sunroof and you see the sun coming up. And finally the husband holds the rope and dances with his wife. I mean, I got to be there, you know. And I'm a Presbyterian. He was in Japan and he was volunteering for a rock band that he adored, making posters. This is while he was at Keio University. It's like Yale or Harvard. If you're at Keio, then whoever else went to Keio is like your brother or sister for life. So while he was volunteering to make posters for this rock band, he fell, he told me, and he hit his head and he bled profusely and he had to go to the hospital. And the doctors later say that that woke up this disease, which is like Lou Gehrig's disease. We started going to neurologists because he had a little bit of trouble navigating the stairs. He felt a little uncomfortable going up and down stairs, just slightly, little tiny things. And then he started getting in automobile accidents, like not serious ones. Nobody got hurt. Went to a bunch of neurologists. None of them around here knew what to do. We went to Mount Sinai. One of the natures of this disease is it makes you a little bit too outspoken. He wasn't insulting, but there was a neurologist at Mount Sinai that he must have insulted because the neurologist lost interest in him. he just had no blocks, you know, in what he wanted to say to anybody. And finally, a friend of Minako's, I think it was a friend of a violist, suggested that he have some DNA testing to see if there's any genetic component. So he got genetically tested, and we found out that there was a gene in Minako's family that went back and suddenly explained why this grandparent was in a wheelchair and this one died young and this one, and it was like, you know, kind of the dots, it connected the dots. Minako was somehow saved from it. Yoshi wasn't. Miyuki got tested. She does not have the gene. So Yoshi began a demise then over several years, I guess, or less. And eventually he started losing the capacity to do basic things. And then he said every Tuesday he lost something. And then he died. I was unlucky. That's the way he put it. There was a concert at Avery Fisher Hall, and the person I dedicated my book to, the family, they own a cafe, and they have a daughter who is one of those people who knows something about everything. And she had never seen a concert, and I invited her to use a ticket. I had 2 tickets to see the Budapest Festival Orchestra with Yvonne Fisher conducting, and they were going to do Bartók Concerto for orchestra. And I said, you want to go to Avery Fisher, I call it Avery Fisher still, and see this concert? And she went with me, and she's sitting next to me, and we had really good seats. And I was excited about the concert, but before there was a singer who I'd never heard of named Janine de Beek, and she was going to sing 3 Handel arias. So I'm sitting there, and out comes this woman, and she opens her mouth, and instead of hearing a note for the entire 3 operas, my son, who had passed away a couple years earlier, starts talking to me, a year or 2, I don't know exactly the date, starts talking to me. He's there, he's in a shirt, like fresh shirt from the Gap, starts looking for me. And he starts talking to me and telling me not to worry, that he's okay. And what he said to me could be condensed in a paragraph, but it took, time stopped for the entire 3 arias. And when she stopped singing, my son was like, I'm out of here. And I had tears. Well, she probably thought it was because of the arias. And I said, I just went through this experience. My son was like, he visited me or something. All the things and metaphors and whatnot that I could put into it are just going to sound shallow compared to the event itself. It happened. It's real. It puts so many things in perspective, including my relationship with Minako. So I've been playing this jazz jam session now at the church every, the second Friday for many years now. 10 years or something like that. Everything I've done now is like 10 years, 20 years at St. Pat's. I've had many lifetimes. So I got a call from the guitar player at the church, Mike Ito, and he said they were going to have a jam session and they were going to do some jazz and would I be interested in playing. And it was an amateur band, and I was interested in piano. So I went there and I did it, and I enjoyed it very much, and I intended to keep doing it. And I was asked to basically direct the band. Started rehearsing at my house. We'd rehearse like twice a week at my house. First of all, I got to play an instrument that I don't know how to play. All these jazz songs are in my mind. So the thought of playing these jazz tunes with an amateur band just seemed like a really great opportunity. And it was at a place where Mom and Dad used to bring the kids for Sunday school when they were younger for a while. In fact, we used to go there, and now I was playing there on a fairly regular basis. All of the things that repelled me from wanting to be a church-going person just evaporated. I really like everything about it. I like what it teaches me, being there. It's so different than what I ever thought it would be to be involved in not only, I don't want to say be involved in the church, but to think of what that building and the people and pastor, and then realizing that it's really not about what I thought church was about. The church and the music and everything, it kind of almost creates itself. It's the composite of everybody and everything that's in it, and not any individual. And I didn't realize that till almost recently. All of a sudden things kind of warmed up, and I used to have a gag reflex just at the word Jesus, unless it was in a Bach cantata or something. Just too many people came at it with the wrong force, you know.
He speaks from his heart when he plays, whether it's melodic or rhythmic, doesn't really matter. He just is always connected to his heart, and I think that's what I love about his playing. When he started the piano at his late age, I was always impressed, number one, with how much he practices. He practices a lot more than I do on the violin, and I think he's just, you know, really not just passionate, but he loves music. Any variations of feelings that we might have in ourselves, I think, comes through his music.
Bach was a total improviser. As you know, in his lifetime, he was not known as a composer. He was known as a virtuoso organist. Or if you have chords like a one chord, right? You have a 1, 2. So if you take here's a D minor chord, so to a, let's say, C sharp diminished, you know. Sharp to D to C sharp diminished, and look what Bach did with it. One of the things that I would hope to achieve with my students is that by instilling a love of music and maybe even a desire for the discipline of learning how to play an instrument, if you weren't born with the empathetic chip in your DNA, that you can at least do a good imitation of it. Music has so much to do with in a relationship with everyone, like at the church, like my jazz band. I hate to admit it, but my jazz band is starting to fulfill an aspect of what I think music really is and can be, maybe more than a lot of professional jobs.
Bye.